On October 22, 2023, Javier Milei, a radical right-wing libertarian, emerged victorious in Argentina's presidential election. As a candidate for the libertarian movement, he identifies as an anarcho-capitalist and strongly advocates for reducing the size of the government, social disinvestment, and extremely liberal capitalist policies. Culturally, Milei generally aligns with liberal views, with exceptions on issues like abortion and euthanasia. His aggressive persona has polarized society, creating both supporters and critics. Promising to address escalating inflation, Milei will assume leadership in a country grappling with economic turmoil and deep political divisions. We interview Atilio Boron, a lifelong critic of imperialist policies and a Harvard PhD, author of numerous books, and a prominent figure in Argentinian and international social research and education. In 2009, he was honored with the International José Martí Prize from UNESCO. His latest book, The Sorcerer of the Tribe, dissects neoliberalism in Latin America. Atilio Boron, thanks for being with us. Javier Milei just won the presidency of Argentina. What do you think is coming now?
Bueno, la verdad que las expectativas son muy negativas, ¿no?
Well, the truth is that expectations are very negative. Milei is not only a character who embodies a deeply reactionary project, a reactionary reconstruction of Argentine capitalism, but he is also, I would dare to say, without being a psychologist, a character who suffers from a certain emotional imbalance. This imbalance leads to explosions of verbal and gestural violence that are truly alarming. In some ways, Javier Milei has interpreted the current moment afflicting a large part of Argentine society. In a context like this, consumption capacities have been reduced to a point not seen for many, many years. I think he has understood this situation, and with his grandiloquent gestures, threats, and denunciations of the famous elite, an elite that has ultimately surrounded him, turning him into a pawn of that elite, he has achieved a significant victory in our last elections. However, the plan of action he proposes is absolutely crazy. I have no other words to describe it. Imagine, there's practically no country without a central bank. Maybe Monaco, but Monaco is a principality that depends on France and uses the euro as its currency. Then there are some small islands in the Pacific, such as Micronesia and the Marshall Islands, that also do not have a central bank. However, these are not national states in the strictest sense of the term. When you talk about functional states, there is none without a central bank. No country exists where markets are completely deregulated, as Milei wants to do. Furthermore, no country has a presidential candidate or an elected president who has stated that if you have problems with money, poverty, etc., it's because there's too much state. The existence of the state, according to Milei, implies robbery, echoing the thoughts of Murray Rothbard. He vows to do everything possible to prevent the government from robbing you. Unfortunately, this absurd message has deeply penetrated Argentine society.
Latin America is an area full of young and poor people, which demographically seems to favor left-wing parties in elections. However, they have been losing the elections lately, and many believe that it's because the controversial job they have done in power. Many sees them as failed administrations. Do you think that that perception has lost them the demographic natural advantage they have in the region?
Mira, yo creo que lo que pasa es que me parece a mí que ha habido toda una...
Look, I believe what's happening is that there appears to be a profound restructuring of contemporary capitalist societies. This process has become even more pronounced on the periphery of the system. At this moment, there seems to be a cultural battle, a cultural war, with the right winning, not necessarily turning people into rightists. I strongly object when told that 56% of the Argentine population is right-wing. Instead, there exists a hardcore faction, for instance, in Chile and other countries. This faction, rooted in the colonial era in Latin America, is not a new phenomenon. Alongside this, there are individuals who are deeply upset, left in a disadvantaged situation due to the recent economic and political changes. These are people mired in poverty, with no apparent prospects, living in areas dominated by insecurity, drug trafficking, and other challenges. When these individuals, like those in Argentina, protest against inflation, salary deterioration, and insecurity in the street, that doesn't necessarily make them right-wing. If I were in their situation, I might protest as well, but that doesn't mean I would agree with the absurd ideas of someone like Milei. Milei goes to extremes, even emulating a Hitler and claiming that his proposal is aesthetically superior to that of the left. When he discusses topics like native peoples and the working class, do you notice? However, the people who voted did not vote for that version of Milei. They voted for him because there were two alternatives. One seen as continuity, and to a large extent, was just that, and another presented to the public as radical change. People want radical change. The left, particularly the Trotskyist left, has not understood this situation. Some sectors of the left, aiming to prevent the victory of this dangerous Criollo Hitler, voted for Massa, thinking that some fundamental demands are non-negotiable. Other sectors of the left preferred to abstain or even vote for Milei, not because they are right-wing. The truth is, we find ourselves in a situation where we have lost the cultural battle. It requires a significant effort, and we lack the means. You know this well, Oscar. The issues with media concentration exist in Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, wherever you look. This is not just about money. It's about the conception of a political strategy that the right possesses and the left lacks. The right places strong emphasis on controlling the media to conquer not only minds and intelligence, but also the hearts of the people. They have achieved this. Today, there are political neuromarketing techniques, along with improved algorithms, enabling precise targeting of specific segments of our societies. This practically prevents or makes it impossible for any advancement by left-wing or progressive sectors.
Avance de los sectores de la izquierda o del progresismo.
The people who voted for Javier Milei wanted a radical change, but that radical change and the policies he wants to implement might, in short term, affect the middle class, affect the lower class. And those voters that voted for Milei expecting some positive change might get some kind of ugly surprise, don't you think?
Absolutamente. Fíjate que...
Absolutely. Note that the middle class, lower middle income voters, and a significant portion of the popular class are going to be severely affected. For instance, Milei is already advising the current government of Alberto Fernandez that it should not pay this bonus, which is typically received around December 15th, the mid-year bonus. In Argentina, half of the 13th salary, known as aguinaldo, is received in June, and the other half is received in mid-December. Milei argues that there is no money, so it won't be paid. This situation is a disaster for people who have already spent a significant portion of that money, anticipating that they would receive the bonus. The salary situation is distressing and affects that sector of Argentine society deeply. Thus, one could say that the traditional conservative right has been veering towards a more fascistic stance. The leadership, I emphasize, not necessarily the people, at least in Latin America, have been radicalizing towards the right, adopting more extreme positions. Since progressive governments fail to address crucial issues in society, an awkward situation arises. Popular organizations supporting these governments are uncertain about whether to take the streets to protest, despite having many valid reasons to do so. This uncertainty leads to a tempering of social criticism, and those groups end up supporting the government. It happened in Argentina, in Bolivia, it happened in Chile, and the result is that people then seek to express their protest, their anger, their rage through other candidates. Opportunistic demagogues are already emerging, like Donald Trump, a great demagogue who, despite having no political experience in the past, demonstrated an impressive ability to build power. Milei is not a case identical to Trump. He is, in a certain sense, more extreme and foul-mouthed, capable of uttering any insult. Psychoanalysts might say he lacks a superego, a filter that restrains such behavior. You cannot insult Pope Francis in a very crude way, no matter how much you feel like doing it, but Milei has said terrible things to him, insults I've never heard before in my life. However, he genuinely represents a very strong, very heterogeneous conservative bloc, and this is what will create a constant push and pull in this government. For example, he had already resolved the issue of the Ministry of Security, the Ministry of Economy, and the Central Bank. He had his own people, but not anymore, because in the background, playing a predominant role, you'll now find Mauricio Macri, who has imposed other names on him. So we will witness a government that stumbles erratically. Faced with a population that will be immobilized for the first 2 or 3 months, in the January and February holidays, even many of those who are alarmed by Milei are now saying, well, he says he's not going to pay the bonuses, etc., but let's give him 100 days of grace to govern. The danger is that a character like Milei and a strategic driver like Macri, pulling the strings behind Milei's candidacy, can cause irreparable damage to this country in 100 days. That is the concern we have at this moment, and one that we must try to avoid at all costs.
Esa es la preocupación que nosotros tenemos en este momento y que tenemos que tratar de evitar a todo costo, ¿no es cierto?
You mentioned Mauricio Macri as somebody behind the power in Javier Milei's camp. And at the same time, you have Javier Milei in national television, where he was asked the prices of the milk and the bread and the basic service. He had absolutely no idea. And so that seems like that he is not a person that responds to reality necessarily. And early on in our conversation, you were mentioning a comparison between Bolsonaro and Javier Milei. Can you tell us a little more about that so we can understand the differences and also how are they similar?
Mira, a ver, Bolsonaro es una persona con gestos extremos, ¿no es cierto?
Look, let's consider Bolsonaro, a person with extreme tendencies, right? But he always maintains a certain level of normality. Bolsonaro is also a man who belongs to the Brazilian political class, unlike Milei, who is an upstart, a media product carefully crafted by big capital through certain television networks. Bolsonaro, on the other hand, had been a federal deputy in Brasilia for 28 years before becoming president. For 28 years. I mean, it's not the same. Milei had absolutely no political presence or in any area of national, provincial, or even municipal life. Bolsonaro was already a well-known figure. Bolsonaro wielded criticisms that were derogatory, chauvinistic, xenophobic, and misogynistic, right? But in all these aspects, misogyny, xenophobia, violent rhetoric, Milei goes much further. Not only do they share similar positions, but Milei expresses them in a crude, vulgar way, filled with insults and in very bad taste. This is what makes him a character that truly causes great irritation in some segments of Argentine society. However, in other segments, particularly in the most disadvantaged popular sectors, which are marked by poverty and hopelessness, they're less concerned about the language Milei uses. Instead, they care about what he represents, a character infused with a mystique and an ability to change something that needs changing. People are right, there are many things that need to change. The serious problem here is that the national government did not have the interest, capacity, or intelligence to credibly propose a change. For various reasons, people did not believe in massa. Consider this. If you have a minister of economy who allows monthly inflation to rise from 3% to 12% within a year, why would you believe that this man, who is already in the government as minister of economy, will be able to accomplish in the Casa Rosada what he couldn't do for a year and a half? So Milei appears more as a rule of thumb than a positive option.
Entonces, Milei aparece por descarte más que por una opción positiva.
This reminds me of the hard choices that the voters have to make now in the United States, where after the last 2 wars, many in good conscience cannot really vote for Joe Biden, but at the same time, they have Donald Trump waiting at the door. So that's kind of like the choice you guys had in Argentina, where you had Milei, who's a radical change, who truly nobody knows what to expect from him. And at the same time, you had Massa, who's just the incarnation of more of the same, right?
Mira, yo creo que se lo mira ahora con una cierta expectativa.
Look, I believe he is currently being observed with a certain expectation, a fearful expectation, I would say, of what this man can do. Unlike Daniel Noboa, the president of Ecuador, he truly believes that it is necessary to dismantle the state, viewing it as an institution designed for theft, robbing both society and the social and economic agents of what rightfully belongs to them. For instance, he suggests things like completely cutting public spending. If there's a need for a sewage treatment plant in the middle of the Puna, let the neighbors organize themselves, and a private individual will appear to offer the service. It's an absolute conception, how can I put it? Merely literary or purely conjectural, an idealistic view detached from reality. He, as you mentioned, lacks an understanding of the basic prices in the Argentine economy. What does Javier Milei have in mind when he thinks about Argentina? Just an Excel spreadsheet, nothing more. He doesn't consider specific economic and social actors. No housewives, unemployed youths, students, or workers about to retire. Only an Excel spreadsheet. He argues that we need to achieve fiscal balance, which is absurd. Tell me, which countries consistently have fiscal balance or a fiscal surplus? Occasionally, a few countries might have a fiscal surplus in a given year, but the United States, Japan, and France do not. Moreover, when you examine international statistics, Argentina's fiscal deficit is lower than that of Spain, France, and several European countries. Yet this is a matter of idealism, where idealism prevails. Just as the left sometimes suffers from leftist infantilism and adheres to ideologies that Lenin criticized, the right also has its own form of idealism. There are economic theologians who believe, for example, in the magic of markets and in the absolute freedom of economic agents. They fail to distinguish between a big boss and a worker with nowhere to go, nowhere to drop dead. Therefore, what he's proposing for Argentina are simply cost-benefit equations, unrelated to the real conditions in which the Argentine economy develops. For instance, he suggests breaking or reducing relations with China and Brazil, accusing them of being communist countries. Brazil and China are the two main trading partners of Argentina, and this trade is a lifeline for most of Argentina's regional economies. But he seems oblivious to all of this. He has a theoretical model in his head, a model of free markets where, if the state doesn't intervene, resources are rationally allocated and winners and losers are adequately and fairly rewarded. He believes that those who succeed have done the best job, while those who fail have done a bad job, and everyone else should be indifferent. He also thinks that to reduce inflation in Argentina, the only solution is to dollarize the Argentine economy. He ignores the significant costs that dollarization caused in Ecuador, for example, during a banking crisis, or the considerable economic costs and suffering experienced by the popular sectors of countries like Italy, Spain, and Portugal when local currencies were replaced by the euro. This led to substantial inflation and a collapse in real wages, which were eventually recovered after 2 or 3 years thanks to the welfare policies of the European Union. However, we don't have a European Union here to ease the transition to a currency pegged to the dollar in a country like Argentina. Therefore, if he wants to pursue that idea, he will likely encounter very strong social resistance.
A facilitar el tránsito de una moneda local al dólar en un país como la Argentina, ¿verdad? Y por lo tanto, si él quiere llevar adelante esa idea, bueno, va a tropezar, yo creo, con una resistencia social muy, pero muy, muy fuerte.
I mean, I can speak from personal experience to say that in Ecuador, I was one of the people who lost 90% of their savings. You know, if you had $100 in your savings, now you have 10. And it's beyond the concept, is the execution of the idea of the dollarization. And that caused, you know, in the case of Ecuador, that caused 10 years of unrest. We had 10 presidents in a period of 10 years. And now in Argentina, they're trying to apply exactly that, just dollarization. So how did you think this is going to play out? Will it get worse before it gets better?
Sí, absolutamente. Yo creo que hay que pensar de que acá se viene una oleada de protestas populares muy fuerte.
Yes, absolutely. I believe we must anticipate a very strong wave of popular protests here, even when the unions and political organizations may not be inclined to mobilize. People will take to the streets nonetheless, not driven by ideological reasons, but out of sheer survival instinct. Consider this. If you are the head of a family with a wife and 2 or 3 children, and your salary collapses, your bonus isn't paid, your monthly payments are delayed, and adjustments aren't made to keep pace with inflation. The issue is no longer whether you align with the right or left of the political spectrum. To survive, you must take to the streets and fight. When these people do come out to protest, they show great courage. Argentines may not engage in street protests frequently, but when they do, let's recall events like the Cordobasa in 1969 and the days of December 19th and 20, 2001. We have proven our capacity to overthrow governments, both military and civilian. If Milei persists with a course of action that pushes millions of Argentines into poverty, misery, and insecurity, I believe that it will be exceedingly challenging for him to remain in government and effectively govern this country.
Va a ser muy difícil para él mantenerse en el gobierno y realmente poder gobernar este país.